The old cemetery lay shrouded in a perpetual twilight, even when the sun beat down upon the rest of Blackwood Hollow. Nestled deep within a copse of gnarled, ancient oaks whose branches, like arthritic fingers, clawed at the perpetually overcast sky, it was a place the townsfolk avoided, not out of superstition, but out of a deep-seated, unspoken reverence for the sorrow it held. Elara Vance, a doctoral candidate in historical preservation, had come to Blackwood Hollow not seeking ghosts, but forgotten narratives. She was here on a grant, tasked with documenting the architectural and social history of this isolated New England town, a place seemingly preserved in amber. But the moment her worn hiking boots crunched on the gravel path leading to the cemetery's rusted iron gates, she knew her carefully structured research plan was about to be irrevocably altered. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible sweetness that clung to the air like a shroud. The gates, half swallowed by rampant ivy, groaned a mournful welcome as she pushed them open. Inside, the world shifted. Gravestones, tilted by time and erosion, stood like silent sentinels, their inscriptions largely unreadable, weathered into oblivion. Moss, thick and velvety, softened the sharp edges of granite and marble. This wasn't a curated historical site. It was a testament to natural decay, a place where the veil between the past and present felt impossibly thin. Elara, usually methodical and detached in her academic pursuits, felt an unfamiliar prickle of unease, a cold sensation that started in her spine and spread through her limbs. She clutched her worn leather notebook, its pages filled with meticulously researched notes on Blackwood Hollow's early Puritan settlers, its fishing industry, its sparse economic shifts. None of that felt relevant now. Her gaze, drawn by an invisible thread, drifted towards a secluded, slightly elevated section of the cemetery, where the oaks grew densest, their canopy forming an almost impenetrable ceiling. The light there was particularly dim, rendering the already shadowed ground a murky canvas of greens and grays. A cluster of stones, smaller than the others, caught her eye. They were arrayed with a peculiar symmetry, almost like a miniature, somber family gathering. Each was crafted from the same dark, unpolished granite, hinting at a singular, perhaps hurried, commission. As she drew closer, the chill intensified, settling in her bones, and the air seemed to grow still, as if holding its breath. The usual symphony of chirping crickets and rustling leaves fell silent, replaced by the pounding of her own heart. Then she saw them. 6 small headstones, each barely reaching her waist, standing shoulder to shoulder in a chilling tableau. The moss that coated most of the other markers here seemed to have recoiled from these, leaving their surfaces starkly visible, as if unwilling to obscure the tragedy they proclaimed. The names, deeply carved and surprisingly well preserved, were what struck her first, a wave of profound sadness washing over her. Eleanor Maddock, born 1888, died date. Thomas Maddock, born 1890, date. Agnes Maddock, born 1892, died hey date. William Maddock, born 1895, died hey date. Clara Maddock, born 1897, died hey date. Baby Maddock, born 1899, to date. The final stone, the smallest, was the one that truly twisted the knife in her heart. Baby Maddock, an infant, perhaps unnamed, or too young to have been given one before its brief existence was extinguished. 6 children, all gone. But it was the date, the single horrifying, unifying detail, that solidified the chill into an icy dread. Across all 6 markers beneath each name, the death date was identical: October 27, 1899. October 27, 1899. 6 children, from the oldest, a girl of 11, to the youngest, an unnamed infant. All dead on the same day. It was a detail so stark, so utterly anomalous, that it screamed of catastrophe. Not a slow, creeping illness that might claim a family one by one, nor an accident that would typically involve only 1 or 2. This was an event, a singular, devastating blow that had swept through the Maddock household, leaving only this silent, stony testament to its passage. Elara felt a wave of nausea, a visceral rejection of the impossible grief that must have engulfed the parents, if any had survived. Her historian's mind, usually so adept at categorizing and analyzing, reeled. Plague, fire, a mass murder. The possibilities were all equally horrifying, equally incomprehensible. She knelt, heedless of the damp earth seeping through her jeans. tracing the cold, sharp edges of Eleanor Maddock's name with a trembling finger. Eleanor, 11 years old. What dreams had she had? What games had she played? And then Thomas, Agnes, William, Clara, and finally, the baby. A lineage extinguished in a single day. The injustice of it was a physical ache in her chest. She had come to Blackwood Hollow to uncover its history. But she had stumbled upon a void, a gaping wound in the town's past, starkly marked by these 6 tiny graves. This wasn't just a historical oddity, it was a profound human tragedy that demanded understanding, demanded answers. The remaining hours of daylight passed in a blur of disquiet. Alara took photographs, her camera clicking with an almost morbid insistence, documenting every angle, every inscription. She sketched the layout of the graves, measured their dimensions, and even attempted to discern any other details on the weathered stone. Though there were none beyond the names and dates. She found no other Maddock graves in the immediate vicinity, no parents, no relatives who might have offered further context. It was as if these 6 children had simply appeared and vanished, leaving behind only this bewildering monument to their collective demise. As the sun began its descent, casting long, skeletal shadows across the cemetery, she reluctantly pulled herself away. The identical date burned into her memory, a silent, persistent question. Back in her rented cottage, a charming but drafty little place on the outskirts of Blackwood Hollow, Alara found sleep elusive. The image of the 6 small stones, huddled together, haunted her. She tossed and turned, the quiet of the night amplifying the unanswered questions. Who were the Maddock children? What unholy event had claimed them all on that fateful day? And why, in a town so seemingly steeped in its own history, was there no obvious explanation, no prominent memorial, no local legend whispered among the elders? Her academic curiosity had morphed into something deeper, a profound need to unearth the truth, a desperate compulsion to give voice to these forgotten children. The next morning, armed with a fresh pot of coffee and an unshakable resolve, Alara began her quest. Her initial research plan, focusing on Puritan land deeds and 19th-century fishing manifests, was abandoned without a second thought. The Maddock children consumed her. She started where any historian would: the Blackwood Hollow Historical Society and Public Library, a quaint, moat-filled building that smelled of old paper and beeswax. Mrs. Gable, the librarian, a woman whose face was a roadmap of fine wrinkles and whose spectacles perched perpetually on the end of her nose, greeted her with a warm, if slightly bemused smile. Mrs. Gable had seen many a summer researcher come and go, usually driven by some quaint genealogical obsession or an interest in the town's purported whaling history. Alara's request, however, was different. Maddock, you say? Gable mused, her brow furrowing slightly as Alara explained her discovery in the cemetery, carefully omitting the more visceral details of her emotional reaction. A rather old name in these parts, but I don't recall any notable Maddock family from the late 1800s. Not one with that many children. Her voice trailed off, a hint of discomfort entering her tone. Alara pressed. 6 children, Mrs. Gable, all on October 27, 1899. It's quite unusual. Gable's eyes, usually bright with the twinkle of a seasoned local historian, became momentarily distant, glazed over with something akin to sorrow, or perhaps evasion. Unusual indeed, dear. A terrible tragedy, I'm sure. The turn of the century was a hard time for many families. Disease, you know, or accidents. She spoke with a practiced, almost dismissive cadence, as if trying to relegate the event to a commonplace misfortune. Despite the undeniable singularity of the identical date, Alara felt a flicker of frustration. Yes, but 6 children all at once. That suggests something more specific. A house fire, perhaps, a widespread epidemic confined to one family. She pushed gently, observing Mrs. Gable's reactions carefully. The librarian cleared her throat, adjusting her spectacles. Well, Blackwood Hollow was a small, tight-knit community then, as it is now. If there had been such a widespread calamity, it would surely be in the town records. We have the old ledgers here, and the newspaper archives. Most of them anyway. She gestured vaguely towards a wall of decaying, leather-bound volumes and shelves laden with brittle, yellowed newspapers. You're welcome to look, of course. Everything is open to the public. Ilara spent the next several days immersed in the archives, her hands growing smudged with ancient dust and ink. She scoured the town's death records from 1899, cross-referencing names, dates, and causes of death. She found no entry for a Maddock family with 6 children dying on October 27, 1899. Not a single one. This was impossible. The gravestones were undeniably there. The names, the date. Was this an oversight? A deliberate omission? Her historian's instinct screamed that records, especially death records, were meticulously kept, even in small towns. The absence of the Maddock children was a gaping hole, a louder declaration than any recorded entry could have been. She moved on to the local newspapers, the Blackwood Hollow Chronicle, a weekly publication that covered everything from town council meetings to the price of fish. She painstakingly flipped through the brittle pages, her eyes scanning for any mention of the Maddocks, any report of a major disaster in late 1899. She read about a barn fire that claimed a farmer's livestock, a minor outbreak of scarlet fever that years, but not in Blackwood Hollow itself, and a tragic fishing accident that took 3 men in the spring. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing, about 6 children from the same family dying on October 27, 1899. The silence was deafening, the void terrifying. It was as if the town itself had collectively decided to erase the Maddock tragedy from its official memory. This systematic absence of information only fueled Ilara's obsession. It wasn't merely a matter of historical fact now, it was a profound injustice. 6 children had died, and their deaths had been expunged from the public record. Why? What could be so terrible, so unspeakable, that an entire town would conspire, consciously or unconsciously, to forget it? Her mind raced through increasingly unsettling scenarios. A crime so heinous it was covered up to protect the town's reputation, a curse so potent that even its memory was dangerous, an event so supernatural that it defied conventional explanation. She rejected the last idea almost immediately. Ilara was a scholar, a woman of science in fact, not a believer in the occult. Yet, the persistent lack of any rational explanation chipped away at her certainty. She tried a different approach. She inquired about the Maddock family name in general, looking for any living descendants, any distant relatives who might still reside in Blackwood Hollow or the surrounding towns. Mrs. Gable, ever helpful within the confines of her comfort zone, provided a few ancestral trees for other old Blackwood Hollow families. But the Maddock name was conspicuously absent from any of the major branches. It was as if the family had simply ceased to exist after 1899. Perhaps they were newcomers, dear, Mrs. Gable suggested one afternoon, noticing Ilara's persistent frown. Passing through. Many families came and went with the tides, you know. Especially with the decline of the whaling industry. But the gravestones were too permanent for that, too deeply rooted in the soil of the old cemetery, too well tended or at least, too well preserved for their age to be the markers of transient souls. Frustrated, Ilara took to walking the town, hoping to glean some information from the living. She frequented the local diner, the Salty Siren, where the aroma of fried fish and strong coffee permeated everything. She nursed endless cups of tea, listening to the casual conversations of the regulars, hoping for a stray word, a whispered rumor, a forgotten piece of folklore. She observed the townsfolk, their faces etched with the quiet dignity of generations spent in a place shaped by the sea and its harsh realities. They were polite, reserved, and incredibly insular. When she dared to bring up the Maddock children, the reaction was always the same: a sudden, uncomfortable silence, a shift in gaze, a change of topic. A few would offer a vague, "Oh, that old tragedy," or "Some things are best left in the past, dear," but none offered any concrete details. It was a wall of communal amnesia, reinforced by generations of unspoken agreement. One afternoon, sitting alone in the diner, she overheard 2 elderly fishermen discussing the upcoming winter storm. Their conversation eventually drifted to the town's old houses. "That old Maddock place," one grumbled, "still standing empty, just gathering dust. Nobody'll touch it." Ilara's ears perked up. "The Maddock place," she interjected, trying to sound casual. The 2 men exchanged a quick, knowing glance. The other one said, his voice gruff. "Out on the old Salt Marsh Road. Been empty since forever. Folks say it's got a chill to it, even in summer. He didn't elaborate, and the conversation swiftly moved on to the merits of different fishing lures. Salt Marsh Road. Elora knew the road. It snaked away from the town center, winding past desolate stretches of marshland, eventually leading to the rocky, windswept coastline. It was known for its isolation, and few inhabited houses dotted its length. The idea that the Maddocks had a house, still standing, still empty, was a significant lead. It suggested a degree of permanence that contradicted the transient family theory. It also suggested a story, a reason why it remained untouched. Haunted, perhaps. The chill the fisherman mentioned resonated with the feeling she'd had in the cemetery. The next day, under a sky the color of pewter, Elora drove her sturdy, but unassuming, SUV down Salt Marsh Road. The landscape quickly transformed from neatly kept houses to wild, untamed marsh, punctuated by skeletal trees and the occasional lone, weather-beaten shack. The road itself narrowed, becoming little more than a dirt track, rutted and uneven. Finally, set back from the road, almost swallowed by overgrown brambles and twisted, wind-stunted pines, she saw it. The Maddock house. It was a two-story farmhouse, once grand, now a decaying shell. Its clapboard siding was peeling and faded, a ghostly white that seemed to shimmer with age and neglect. The windows, dark and empty, stared out like vacant eyes, many of them broken, reflecting the bleak sky. The porch sagged precariously, its steps collapsed in a pile of rotting wood. A tall, skeletal chimney, leaning at a dangerous angle, seemed to be the only thing holding the structure upright. There was an oppressive stillness about the place, a profound silence that seemed to absorb all sound. Even the wind, usually howling off the sea, seemed to die when it reached the house. Elora parked her car some distance away, not wanting to draw attention or appear too invasive. She approached the house cautiously, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The overgrown garden, a tangled mess of thorny bushes and long, dead weeds, scraped against her trousers as she pushed through it. A skeletal rose bush, its thorns sharp and menacing, clung to the porch, its long, dead blooms resembling dried blood. The air here was even heavier than in the cemetery, laden with the smell of damp decay. But also something else. Something subtly metallic, like old pennies and rust. She peered through a shattered window, her breath fogging the remaining glass. Inside, the house was a mausoleum of dust and shadows. Furniture, draped in what looked like centuries of dust sheets, stood like ghostly figures. The floorboards, warped and buckling, looked perilous. She saw the outline of a rocking chair in one room, and a small, overturned wooden toy horse in another. A profound sense of desolation emanated from the interior, a palpable sadness that made her throat tighten. This wasn't just an abandoned house, it was a tomb, preserving the lingering echoes of a family that had simply vanished. The thought occurred to her, unbidden and chilling, that perhaps the Maddock children hadn't died elsewhere and then been buried. Perhaps they had died here. All of them. In this very house. The idea was horrific, yet it explained the house's persistent vacancy, the town's avoidance, the lingering sense of unease that clung to the property like a shroud. A house where 6 children met their end on the same day would be more than just a house. It would be a monument to unspeakable sorrow. A place forever marked by a singular, devastating event. She spent a long time simply standing there, gazing at the house, trying to piece together the fragments of what little she knew. 6 graves, 1 date, no records, a silent, insular town, and now a desolate, empty house radiating an almost tangible sense of grief and unanswered questions. The academic challenge had morphed into a personal quest, a deeply felt empathy for the forgotten children. She felt an overwhelming urge to go inside, to explore the dusty rooms, to find any clue, any scrap of paper, any diary entry that might explain the horror of October 27, 1899. But the house seemed to warn her away, its dark windows promising only more questions, perhaps even dangers. For now, she observed, letting the silence and the desolate atmosphere wash over her. As dusk began to settle, painting the marshlands in shades of purple and gray, Elora reluctantly turned from the Maddock house. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she couldn't leave Blackwood Hollow until she had uncovered the truth about the Maddock children. The mystery had taken root in her soul. intertwining with her academic rigor and her innate sense of justice. She felt a profound connection to those 6 small graves, to the untold story they represented. The thought of them, lying there, silent and forgotten, was unbearable. She had to break the silence. She had to give them their voices back. But the path to that truth was obscured by a century of silence, by a town's collective amnesia, and perhaps by something far more sinister than simple forgetfulness. The distinct metallic tang in the air lingered in her nostrils, a faint whisper of what might have transpired within those decaying walls. As she drove away, the Maddock house, silhouetted against the deepening gloom, seemed to watch her, its secrets held tight within its crumbling foundations, waiting to be unearthed, or perhaps determined to remain forever buried. The old Maddock house stood like a gaunt specter against the deepening gloom of the Salt Marsh Road, its vacant windows reflecting the leaden sky, holding its secrets close. Elara Vance, wrapped in her thickest wool coat against the biting coastal wind, felt an irresistible pull towards it, a professional duty now inextricably intertwined with a profound sense of personal responsibility. The 6 graves in the cemetery, the impenetrable wall of silence in Blackwood Hollow, the complete absence of official records, all pointed to this decaying structure as the heart of the mystery. It wasn't just an abandoned building. It was a sealed vault containing the final moments of a family that had been erased from history. She had to get inside. Her first attempts to gain legal access were met with the same polite, yet firm, resistance that characterized Blackwood Hollow's response to her inquiries. Mrs. Gable, when Elara returned to the library and discreetly asked about the house's ownership, became flustered. "Oh, dear Elara, that house has been tangled in legal limbo for decades. No clear owner, no one willing to claim it. It's best left alone, truly." The town council, a small, wary-looking group of men who met once a month in the back room of the general store, gave her even less satisfaction. The Maddock property. A liability, Miss Vance. A hazard. We've considered tearing it down, but, well, there are always reasons not to. Reasons they were unwilling to articulate, leaving Elara with the impression of a deep-seated, superstitious reluctance. The town wanted the house to simply crumble into the marsh, taking its secrets with it. But Elara was no longer simply a researcher. She was an excavator of forgotten truths. The thought of those children, their brief lives snuffed out in such an inexplicable manner, drove her. If the town wouldn't open the door for her, she would find another way in. She returned to the house the following morning, well before dawn, armed with a powerful flashlight, a crowbar she'd borrowed Sebros without permission from her landlord's shed, and a knot of nervous anticipation in her stomach. The cold was bone deep, and the wind, free from the town's sheltering trees, howled across the marsh, whipping her hair around her face. The house seemed even more formidable in the pre-dawn darkness, a hulking, silent sentinel of sorrow. The broken windows she'd observed before provided the most obvious entry points. She circled the structure, the crunch of dead leaves underfoot unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. A ground-floor window at the rear, half obscured by a thicket of blackberry bushes, looked particularly vulnerable, its frame rotted away in places. With a deep breath, Elara pushed aside the thorny branches, wincing as a few barbs snagged her coat. She used the crowbar to pry away a few more pieces of loose wood from the sill, careful not to make too much noise. The glass was already gone, leaving only a jagged, empty opening. She tested the edge, then carefully hoisted herself through, scraping her knee on a splintered board. She landed with a soft thud on what felt like a thick carpet of dust. The air inside was stale, cold, and heavy, thick with the scent of decay mildew, and that persistent, faint metallic tang she had noticed before, now more pronounced. Her flashlight beam cut through the absolute darkness, revealing a scene frozen in time, yet ravaged by neglect. Dust motes danced in the beam like tiny ephemeral spirits. Cobwebs thick and velvety, draped from every surface, transforming furniture into ghostly, formless mounds. The silence inside was profound, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of her own heart and the distant whine of the wind outside. She found herself in what appeared to be the parlor. A faded rug, its once vibrant patterns obscured by grime, covered most of the floor. A horsehair sofa, its stuffing spilling from a torn cushion, stood against one wall. A grand piano, its keys yellowed and many missing, stood silent witness in a corner, draped in a shroud of dust. Elara moved slowly, cautiously, her flashlight beam sweeping across the room. Every object felt imbued with a lingering presence, a faint echo of the lives once lived here. It was profoundly sad, like wandering through a forgotten dream. The house was not large, but its layout was typical of a late 19th century farmhouse. Downstairs, she found a rudimentary kitchen, its cast-iron stove rusting in place, a few chipped ceramic plates still stacked on a shelf. The metallic tang was strongest here, mingling with the faint smell of something like burnt sugar, or perhaps dried blood. A long, sturdy wooden table dominated the center of the kitchen, its surface scarred by a century of forgotten meals and now covered in a thick layer of dust, almost an inch deep in places. This was the heart of the home where families gathered, shared stories, broke bread. The emptiness here felt particularly poignant. She moved into what she assumed was the dining room, a more formal space adjacent to the kitchen. A heavy wooden dining table, surrounded by high-backed chairs, stood untouched, awaiting a dinner that would never be served. On a side buffet, a single, tarnished silver candlestick stood sentry. Nothing seemed obviously disturbed, no signs of a struggle or hurried departure. It was as if the family had simply ceased to exist, leaving everything in its place, waiting for their return. She then entered a smaller room off the parlor, which, given the presence of a large, imposing desk and a tall, glass-fronted bookcase, she identified as a study or library. This was where she hoped to find something concrete: letters, a ledger, a diary, anything that might shed light on the Maddock family's circumstances. The desk was covered in papers, but they disintegrated into flakes of dust at the slightest touch. The bookcase contained rows of leather-bound books, their spines cracked and faded, their pages brittle. Most were religious texts, farming almanacs, or classic literature. Nothing that immediately jumped out as revelatory. Elara methodically began to search, moving with a quiet reverence, trying to disturb as little as possible. She checked desk drawers, finding only dried inkwells, a few rusty pens, and a small, leather-bound financial ledger. The ledger detailed household expenses, purchases from the general store, and occasional sales of produce or eggs. It provided a glimpse into their modest, hard-working life, but offered no hint of impending doom. The last entry was dated October 25, 1899, 2 days before the tragedy. The abrupt cessation of entries was chilling. She ran her hands along the spines of the books, checking for hidden compartments or loose boards. Nothing. Her frustration began to mount. The house, for all its oppressive atmosphere, was yielding no easy answers. Was it truly just a straightforward, if tragic, case of a severe epidemic that swept through the family, the records of which were deliberately suppressed? But the specific symptoms she imagined, the precise timing, the complete lack of official narrative, it still didn't quite add up. With a sigh, Elara turned to leave the study, her flashlight beam sweeping one last time across the room. As it hit the back wall, she noticed a faint discoloration in the wallpaper behind the bookcase. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a slight darkening in the floral pattern. Intrigued, she nudged the heavy bookcase. It groaned on its ancient casters, moving just enough to reveal a small, shallow cavity in the wall, perfectly concealed behind it. Her heart leaped. Inside the cavity, carefully wrapped in a piece of oilskin that had done little to protect it from the damp, was a single, thin leather-bound book. It was a diary. Its cover was cracked and warped, the leather dry and stiff, but the clasp was still intact. This was it. This had to be it. She carefully extracted it, her hands trembling. Even through the oilskin, she could feel the cold, almost brittle quality of the pages within. She carried the diary to the kitchen table, the strongest surface she could find, and gently laid it down. The flashlight provided a weak but focused beam. With infinite care, she unfastened the clasp and peeled back the oilskin. The first few pages were stiff, fused together by moisture and time, but further in, they were fragile but surprisingly legible, albeit stained and discolored. The handwriting was neat, slightly looping, undeniably a child's hand but mature for her age. The first entry she could decipher was dated January 14, 1899. This was Eleanor's diary. Elara began to read, her historian's detachment quickly dissolving into a profound empathy. January 14, 1899. Mama says I am too old for stories, but Papa tells me I am just right. The snow is very deep today, and Thomas and Eggs tried to build a fort, but Papa said it was too cold and they must come inside. Baby is still small, he cries much. I hope he grows big and strong like William. He is almost 4 now and Clara is 2. Mama says I must help more with them. But I wish I could read my books. Papa says it is important to be helpful. I wrote this while they were napping. The early entries painted a picture of a typical rural family life at the turn of the century. Core's schoolwork, home, schooled. It seemed by their mother games, the changing seasons, small joys, and the usual sibling squabbles. Eleanor's voice was clear, observant, and intelligent. She wrote about her younger siblings with a mixture of exasperation and affection. She longed for books, for knowledge, for a life beyond the confines of Blackwood Hollow. She meticulously recorded the weather, visitors, and events in the town, like the annual harvest festival or the arrival of a new shipment of goods at the general store. As the months turned, a subtle shift began to emerge in Eleanor's entries. April 12, 1899. The spring is wet. Mama says the chickens are laying poorly. Papa worries about the crop this year. He heard from Mr. Silas at the general store that the cough is going around in New London. Not here yet, thank goodness. Baby coughed a little today, but Mama says it is just the damp. June 3, 1899. The heat has come sudden. Papa says the marsh smells different this year. Like something has died in it, but not like usual. Thomas says he saw strange lights near the old lighthouse last night, but Papa said it was just a fisherman's lantern. My headache is sometimes when the sun is very bright. July 20, 1899. Agnes has a fever. Mama is worried. She keeps putting cool cloths on her. She is not eating. Papa went to fetch Dr. Hemlock, but he is away in Boston. The air is still, no breeze, and the smell is stronger. Mama says it is just the marsh, but it is not the marsh smell. It is sweet like overripe fruit, but sickening. The narrative began to twist, growing darker, imbued with a rising sense of unease. August 5, 1899. Agnes is better, thank God. But she is very thin, and she keeps having bad dreams. She talks about the smell and the sweet mist. Mama says she is just weak. But now William has the cough. It is not like a normal cough. It sounds wet, and sometimes he tastes blood, he says. Papa is very quiet. He watches the marsh more now. September fun, 1899. The smell is everywhere now, even inside the house. Mama says it is the salt air, but I know it is not. It comes and goes, but mostly it stays. It makes my head fuzzy. Clara fell today, and she cried for a very long time. Not like her. Papa tried to make a remedy for William, something with herbs from the woods. It did not help. He is weaker. Thomas found a dead bird on the porch this morning. It was very strange, not like a cat caught it. It was still. Elara felt a cold dread creeping through her. The symptoms described were vague, yet unsettling. Fuzzy head, sweet mist, not like a normal cough. Still, dead birds. It wasn't pointing to a common illness, but something insidious, something environmental, perhaps. September 15, 1899. The doctor from Plymouth came today, Dr. Barlow. Papa had to go all the way there to fetch him. He looked at William and Agnes, and he looked at the baby. He did not say much. He said it was marsh fever, but he looked very grim. He told Papa to keep us inside always, and to boil all our water. We already do that. He looked at Mama with sad eyes. Mama cried after he left. She said he knew nothing. I heard her tell Papa that it was the breath of the fen. Papa shushed her. Fen. What is a fen? Is it like the marsh? The breath of the fen. Elara paused, the words echoing in her mind. A folklore term, perhaps, for a marsh spirit or a miasma. It certainly wasn't a medical diagnosis. The Plymouth doctor's reaction suggested helplessness, an inability to name or treat whatever was afflicting the Maddock children. The deliberate vagueness in the journal entries, interpreted through a child's eyes, made the horror even more potent. October 3, 1899. Baby is very sick now. His breathing is very shallow. Mama sings to him, but her voice shakes. Papa does not leave the house. He sits by the fire, just watching. The air inside the house is very heavy, and the smell, it is stronger, like something blooming that should not. A terrible sweetness that makes my throat burn. Thomas has started seeing things, he says. Shadows moving in the corners when there are none. He says his skin feels like pins and needles. I try to be brave for Mama. But I am very afraid. The symptoms were evolving, becoming more specific and disturbing: shallow breathing, shadows, pins and needles. This was not typical of scarlet fever or diphtheria. This sounded like something affecting the nervous system or perhaps a systemic poisoning. October 12, 1899. Clara is weak now. She mostly sleeps. Mama tries to feed her, but she cannot swallow. William is worse. He coughs up black phlegm. Papa is frantic. He has covered all the windows with blankets, but it doesn't help. The light feels wrong. The air feels heavy, pressing on us. The smell makes me feel dizzy. I hear strange sounds outside sometimes, like crying, but it is not the wind. It is like the marsh itself is weeping. Papa says it is my imagination, but I know it is not. I saw a shimmer in the air near the baby's cradle. Like heat, but it was cold. A cold shimmer. A shimmer in the air, like heat but cold. This was not a symptom of disease. This was something else. Something truly inexplicable. Elara's mind, always rational, was struggling to process these increasingly bizarre details. October 20, 1899. The baby is gone. Mama is broken. She sits by his cradle, just rocking, whispering his name. Papa buried him quickly in the back garden by the oak tree. He said we could not let anyone know. He said it was a secret sickness, and if the town knew, they would burn the house down. Burn the house. Why, he cried when he said it. My chest hurts. My breath feels shallow. I am so tired. October 24, 1899. William died this morning. His eyes were wide open. His skin was pale, almost blue. Papa carried him out, wrapped in a blanket. He is burying them all near the old oak, one by one. He works in secret, under the cover of night. Mama is not speaking. Thomas is now very weak. He just stares at the ceiling. He doesn't even see the shadows anymore. I think I am next. My hands tremble as I write this. The sweet smell is like honeyed death now. It is in my mouth, on my tongue. It tastes metallic, like old pennies. Metallic taste, like old pennies. That was the smell she'd noticed in the house, the metallic tang. It wasn't just a smell, it was a taste, a part of the affliction. Her heart ached for Eleanor, writing these last, desperate entries as death claimed her family one by one. The fear of being discovered, the secret burials that explained the lack of official records, the town's silence. They weren't just protecting a reputation, they were protecting the family's memory from a devastating, terrifying stigma. October 26, 1899. Thomas is gone. He passed in the night. Now only Agnes, Clara, Mama, Papa, and me. But Agnes is not moving much. Clara coughs, a tiny sound. I feel so weak. My fingers are stiff, I can barely hold the pen. Mama tried to make us tea, but her hands shook too much. Papa looks like a ghost. He sits by the window watching the marsh, his face empty. He said, "It comes from the earth, Eleanor. The earth itself. The sweet smell is overwhelming. It is inside me. It is in my blood. I see flashes of strange lights, like green fire, behind my eyes. I am cold, so cold, but my skin burns. My throat is closing. I am afraid." The entry broke off here, the final words a desperate scrawl. A few lines below, still on the same page, the handwriting changed. It was larger, less refined, clearly an adult's hand, shaky with grief and exhaustion. October 27, 1899. My dearest Eleanor, my brave, beautiful girl, you fought so hard. Agnes, Clara, all gone today. My sweet children, they are at peace. The curse of this land, it has taken them all. What have we done to deserve this? Only high illegible name, perhaps the mother, or a distorted I, am left, and soon I will follow. Buried them all by the oak. Forgive me, my loves. Forgive me for not saving you. The world must never know what happened here. This place is tainted. The very air. God help us. The entry ended abruptly, a smear of something dark, perhaps tears or blood, marring the final words. The finality of it was crushing. Elara closed the diary, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. She sat in the silent, dust-filled kitchen, the flashlight beam a lonely beacon in the oppressive darkness, processing the raw, visceral grief of the parents, the terror of the children. 6 children. All on October 27, 1899, not a mass murder, not a fire, not even a simple common epidemic, it was something else. The breath of the fen. It comes from the earth, Eleanor. The earth itself. Green fire. Sweet smell, metallic like old pennies. The puzzle pieces were starting to connect, but they formed a picture far more disturbing than she could have imagined. This wasn't a conventional historical mystery. This was something that brushed against the edges of the supernatural, or at the very least, something that defied easy scientific explanation for its time. A localized, environmental agent of death, perhaps a toxin, a gas, a unique pathogen, but described in terms that hinted at something more folkloric, more malevolent. The journal explained the secret burials, the lack of records, the town's conspiracy of silence. The parents, driven by fear of shame or further contagion, had buried their children in secret. The town, perhaps aware of the secret sickness and its terrifying nature, chose to forget, to sever all ties with the Maddock family, to erase the very memory of what had happened to prevent panic, or perhaps to prevent a similar fate. The reasons not to tear down the house, as the town council put it, were not financial or logistical. They were born of a deep-seated fear of disturbing the site, of awakening whatever curse lay within. Alara realized that she was no longer pursuing a mere academic exercise. She had stumbled upon a forgotten horror, a tragedy so profound and so unsettling that it had been deliberately wiped from the public consciousness. Eleanor's journal was a lifeline to the past, a raw, unfiltered testament to unimaginable suffering. But it also raised new, more profound questions. What was this breath of the fen? What was the sweet mist and the green fire? And why had it targeted only the Maddock children and perhaps their mother? The final entry was ambiguous about the mother's survival, and then the father's fate remained unknown, though the tone suggested he too was on the brink. She needed to understand the secret sickness. She needed to understand what exactly lay hidden within the earth of Blackwood Hollow. What malevolent force had claimed the Maddock children? The metallic taste and sweet smell, the strange lights, the pins and needles, these were specific details that might, with modern knowledge, point to something identifiable. Perhaps a unique chemical, a rare natural phenomenon, or something truly beyond scientific comprehension. Alara carefully placed the diary back into its oilskin wrapping and returned it to its hiding place behind the bookcase, knowing she could retrieve it later. This was not a document to be casually paraded about. Its contents were too personal, too devastating, and too potentially disruptive to the fragile peace of Blackwood Hollow. She had breached the first wall of silence. Now, she had to delve deeper into the truth of the breath of the fen. Her path was no longer about historical preservation. It was about seeking justice for the Maddock children, by finally understanding the unmentionable horror that had claimed them. As she slipped out of the house into the still, dark morning, the sweet, metallic tang seemed to cling to her clothes, a chilling reminder of the secret she now carried. The bitter coastal wind bit at Alara's skin as she emerged from the Maddock house in the pre-dawn gloom, the cold far deeper than the mere autumn chill. It was the cold of profound grief, of a century-old horror that had seeped into the very foundations of the decaying farmhouse and clung to her like a shroud. Her hand still trembled, not from the cold, but from the raw, unvarnished terror contained within Eleanor's diary. She had read it cover to cover, every agonizing word etched into her memory, a litany of innocent suffering and a parent's desperate, heart-breaking attempt to protect their children, even in death. Back in the relative warmth of her rented cottage, Alara built a roaring fire, but it did little to dispel the chill in her bones. The events of the past few days, culminating in the diary's harrowing revelations, had torn through her academic detachment, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. This wasn't just a historical puzzle anymore. It was a deeply personal burden. She had looked into the abyss of the Maddock family's final days, and the abyss had looked back. She spread out her notes, photographs, and the few research papers she'd printed earlier, trying to anchor herself in the familiar world of facts and analysis. But the logical framework of her mind struggled against the diary's spectral details. Sweet mist, a green fire, cold shimmer, the breath of the fen. These were not clinical symptoms but the language of folklore and nightmare. Yet, woven within them were concrete physical sensations: the pervasive sweet, metallic taste, the pins and needles, the shallow breathing, the black flame. Her historian's brain, trained to sift through disparate data, began to desperately search for contemporary scientific parallels, something, anything, that could explain this unique confluence of horrors. She sat at her small, rickety desk, illuminated by the glow of her laptop screen, its modern light a stark contrast to the oil lamp that must have illuminated Eleanor's last, desperate words. Her internet connection, surprisingly reliable for Blackwood Hollow, became her lifeline. She typed keywords into medical and scientific databases: sudden mass poisoning family, environmental toxins marshland, sweet metallic taste illness, green light phenomena biological. The search results were a dizzying array of possibilities, most of which proved dead ends. Heavy metal poisoning was a strong candidate. Arsenic, for instance, could cause neurological symptoms, gastrointestinal distress, and even skin discoloration. Mercury poisoning, particularly methylmercury, resonated more strongly with Eleanor's descriptions. The pins and needles, sensation paresthesia, vision changes like the shimmer or green fire, as distorted perception, cognitive decline, the fuzzy head, tremors, and respiratory issues were all hallmarks of severe mercury toxicity. The metallic taste, like old pennies, was a classic symptom. Marshes and fens, in certain geological conditions, could be environments where mercury accumulated, often from industrial runoff or natural deposits, and converted into its more toxic methylmercury form by anaerobic bacteria. But the sweet smell remained an enigma. Mercury typically has no distinct odor or a faint, acrid one, not sweet. And the green fire was still beyond any common toxicological explanation. It sounded almost hallucinatory, or perhaps a rare phenomenon like marsh gas igniting, but occurring indoors. Unlikely. She researched rare forms of fungal poisoning, looking for neurotoxins or compounds that could create such sensory distortions. Ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire, caused by a fungus on rye, produced gangrene and hallucinations, but the symptoms didn't align perfectly. Other obscure plant or fungal toxins found in marsh environments were hard to pinpoint without specific knowledge of the local ecosystem in the late 19th century. Then there were the gases: methane, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, all common byproducts of decaying organic matter in bogs and marshes. Methane was odorless, but could displace oxygen and cause suffocation. Hydrogen sulfide had a rotten egg smell, and in high concentrations, could cause rapid collapse and death, but it wasn't sweet. Carbon monoxide was colorless and odorless, a silent killer, causing headaches and nausea, but again, no sweet smell or metallic taste. Could it be a unique combination of gases, or something much rarer? Elara found a few obscure papers referencing phosphine gas, pH3, sometimes produced in decaying organic matter in anaerobic conditions. Phosphine has a fishy, or garlicky, odor, but a very dilute concentration might be perceived as something less offensive, even vaguely sweet, to some individuals. It's highly toxic, affecting the respiratory and nervous systems. In high concentrations, it could even cause a faint glow, or will-o'-the wisp effect as it reacts with air, which might be interpreted as green fire, in the dim light of a house. This was a tantalizing, if still imperfect, fit. The cold shimmer could be a visual effect of a mirage from temperature gradients, or a specific type of air distortion. The combination of a potent neurotoxin like methylmercury and a strange gas like phosphine or a unique marsh gas was a complex scenario, but it was the most scientifically plausible explanation that encompassed most of Eleanor's descriptions, excluding the truly inexplicable aspects. This wasn't a standard illness. It was a very localized, environmentally specific poisoning event, and the fact that it had occurred indoors, within the Maddock home, suggested that the house itself was either built over the source, or it somehow trapped and concentrated the deadly emanation. The realization settled over Elara with a chilling weight. The parents hadn't buried their children in secret out of simple shame for a common disease. They had done so out of a desperate, perhaps primal, fear of something the earth itself was breathing out, something they likely perceived as a curse. And their fear of the town, burning the house down, was not just a metaphorical expression of social ostracization. It was a desperate, almost superstitious act to contain a perceived contagion, a malevolent force. The town, in turn, had chosen collective amnesia, a protective measure to keep the horror contained within the confines of the Maddock property. Elora knew her next step was crucial and dangerous. She had to go back to the marsh, not just to the house, but to the source itself. She needed to understand the unique geological and biological conditions of the salt marsh that could have given birth to such a deadly phenomenon. Her research had hinted at specific types of wetlands, often called poison bogs, or fens known for emitting dangerous gases or accumulating toxic minerals. Fen was the key word from Eleanor's diary, the breath of the fen. The following afternoon, under a sky that seemed to mirror the oppressive mood of Blackwood Hollow, Elora returned to Salt Marsh Road. She packed a small kit, a compass, a detailed topographic map of the area, which she'd found in an old geological survey book at the library, hidden under a stack of irrelevant fishing journals, a small battery-operated air quality sensor she'd ordered online and had delivered to a discreet P.O. box, a professional precaution she now saw as absolutely vital, and a heavy-duty respirator mask. She was no longer just an academic. She was an investigator stepping into a very real, very dangerous, and very old crime scene. She started her exploration at the edge of the Maddock property, where the cultivated land gave way to the wild, tangled marsh. The air here was different from the general coastal breeze, stiller, heavier, and permeated by that cloying sweetness, now more noticeable in the still air. It was faint at first, almost pleasant, like honeysuckle gone sickly, but it quickly became nauseating, with that distinct metallic undertone. She felt a vague headache starting behind her eyes, a dull throb that worsened with each breath. Eleanor's words echoed in her mind, "Makes my head fuzzy." Following the topographic map, Elora ventured deeper into the marsh, carefully avoiding the deepest pools and treacherous mud patches. The terrain was uneven, a labyrinth of reedy hummocks, stagnant water, and gnarled, moss-covered trees. The silence was profound, broken only by the squelch of her boots and the distant cry of a gull. The air quality sensor, a small handheld device, registered an anomaly. Its readout was fluctuating wildly, showing spikes in various volatile organic compounds and an unusually low oxygen level in certain pockets. This wasn't a definitive diagnosis, but it confirmed that something unusual was in the air. She moved slowly, guided by the intensifying sweet, metallic smell. It grew stronger as she approached a particularly dense thicket of black alders, their branches forming a shadowy, almost sinister canopy. Beneath them, the marsh floor became eerily still, the water dark and glassy, reflecting the dull sky like a fractured mirror. Here, the vegetation was stunted and sickly, patches of grayish moss clinging to skeletal branches. It was a pocket of unnatural decay within the already wild marsh. As she stepped into the shadow of the alders, the headache intensified, hammering behind her eyes. The sweet, metallic taste was overwhelming now, coating her tongue. Her skin prickled, a faint tingling sensation spreading through her hands and feet. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing down on her lungs. She quickly pulled out her respirator mask and donned it, the filtered air providing only a marginal relief, as if the sensation had already permeated her. Then she saw it. In a small, particularly still pool of water, nestled among ancient, decaying logs, something shimmered. It wasn't a reflection of the sky. It was a faint, almost translucent cold shimmer, exactly as Eleanor had described. It danced above the surface of the water, a wavering, ethereal haze. And within that shimmer, like tiny, ephemeral sparks, she saw them, flashes of green light, brief and elusive, like fireflies struggling to ignite. Green fire, Eleanor had called it. Elora's breath hitched even through the mask. This was it. This was the source. This was the breath of the fen. It wasn't a curse in the supernatural sense, not entirely. It was a potent, localized emanation, a complex cocktail of gases and perhaps aerosolized particles from the unique geological and biological decay processes occurring in this specific, isolated part of the marsh. The cold shimmer might be a visual distortion caused by gas density differences, and the green fire could be phosphine gas igniting or some other rare chemiluminescent reaction from decaying organic matter. The sweet, metallic taste and pins and needles symptoms perfectly aligned with Eleanor's descriptions. suggesting the presence of a potent neurotoxin, perhaps mercury being vaporized or carried on these emanations, or another rare heavy metal vapor. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating. She had found it. She had found the invisible killer that had claimed the Maddock children. But standing there, breathing the tainted air, even through the mask, Elara felt a profound sense of vulnerability. This place was truly malignant. It was a natural poison factory, quietly churning out death for over a century. The Maddock house, built precariously close to this hidden pocket, had become a death trap, concentrating the lethal emanations within its walls, especially when the atmospheric conditions were just right, or when specific seasonal changes in the marsh intensified the phenomenon. The last entries in Eleanor's diary, detailing the family's decline and death in October, likely coincided with such a seasonal peak in the marsh's deadly exhalations. She spent as little time as possible near the immediate source, taking more air samples with her sensor, trying to measure the concentration levels. The numbers were alarming, far beyond safe limits. She took photographs of the sickly vegetation, the still, shimmering pool, and the general topography of the area, meticulously documenting everything. She felt the heavy fatigue of the tainted air, even with the mask, and a persistent, low-grade nausea. It was a testament to the sheer potency of the breath that the Maddock family, trapped indoors, had succumbed so quickly and completely. Elara retreated from the heart of the fen, her boots splashing through the shallow water, her mind racing. She had the physical evidence, the scientific hypothesis, and most importantly, the harrowing human story from Eleanor's diary. It was time to break Blackwood Hollow's century-long silence. She walked straight to the Blackwood Hollow Historical Society and Public Library, the diary clutched in her hand. Mrs. Gable was at her usual post, peering over her spectacles at a local newspaper. "Elara, dear, you look peaked. Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, her voice tinged with genuine concern. "I found it, Mrs. Gable," Elara said, her voice husky with emotion. "I found the Maddock family's story, and why the town has kept silent." She laid the diary gently on the counter, its oilskin wrapper still encasing its brittle pages. This belonged to Eleanor Maddock. It tells the story of October 27, 1899. Mrs. Gable's eyes widened, her usually calm demeanor cracking. She looked at the diary, then at Elara, her gaze filled with an ancient fear. "Oh, dear. That old thing? It's better left buried." Her voice was barely a whisper. "No," Elara countered, firmly but gently. "It's better brought to light. Eleanor, Thomas, Agnes, William, Clara, and the baby, they deserve to have their truth told. They died of a unique environmental poisoning, a secret sickness their parents called the breath of the fen, which emanated from the marsh itself. I found the source." Mrs. Gable sank into her chair, her face ashen. She looked at Elara, a profound sadness in her eyes. "My grandmother, she used to tell stories. Not outright, mind you, never outright, but whispers. Of the whispering death in the lowlands. Of a sickness that took folks who built too close to the black earth. She spoke of lights and smells, but she'd always cross herself after. Said it was the work of, well, she didn't know what. But she called it the marsh's hunger." "The marsh's hunger," Elara repeated, a chill running down her spine. The local folklore, the whispered warnings, were not just superstition. They were generations of empirical observation, a collective understanding of a dangerous natural phenomenon that predated scientific explanation. The Maddock family wasn't the first, perhaps, to be afflicted, but their tragedy was the most complete, the one that forced the town into a protective, collective silence. "They were afraid, Elara," Mrs. Gable continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "Afraid of panic. Afraid of contagion. Afraid of what people would say if the town was known for such of a thing. They chose to forget, to sever the ties, to pretend it never happened. It was a terrible choice, made out of fear, I suppose, and it kept the truth buried for over 100 years." Elara spent the next few hours with Mrs. Gable, not just reading excerpts from the diary, but explaining her scientific hypothesis, bridging the gap between Eleanor's terrified observations and modern toxicology. Mrs. Gable, initially overwhelmed, gradually began to understand, her long-held, vague fears replaced by a clearer, if still disturbing, picture. She agreed that the truth needed to come out. Together, they approached the town council. The meeting was fraught with tension. The same wary-looking men Alara had met before sat around a scarred wooden table in the back room of the general store. Alara laid out her findings: the Maddock children's graves, the inexplicable lack of records, the discovery of Eleanor's diary, and her own scientific investigation into the marsh's environmental conditions. She spoke of the potential for phosphine gas and methylmercury vapors, of the unique geology that created a localized death trap. She used the phrases from the diary: the breath of the fen, sweet metallic smell, green fire, cold shimmer, and connected them to plausible, albeit rare, scientific explanations. She showed them the readings from her air quality sensor. The initial reaction was predictable: denial, anger, accusations of sensationalism.
"You're stirring up old ghosts, Miss Vance!"
one man grumbled. "Some things are better left undisturbed," another shouted. But Alara held her ground. She spoke with a quiet passion fueled by the memory of Eleanor's final, desperate words. She spoke of the injustice done to the Maddock children, of their right to be remembered, not as a forgotten tragedy, but as victims of a powerful, natural phenomenon that the town had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, covered up. It was Mrs. Gable who swayed them. She stood, her slight frame radiating an unexpected authority. "My grandmother spoke of this. Our grandmothers, our grandfathers, they knew. They just chose to forget, for what they thought was the good of the town. But burying the truth doesn't make it go away. It just leaves a wound festering." She looked at each council member, her eyes unwavering. "These children, they deserve their peace. And Blackwood Hollow, we deserve to finally know what happened on our own land." The silence that followed was different from the evasive silence Alara had encountered before. This was the silence of grudging acceptance, of uncomfortable realization. The chairman, a stoic man named Mr. Peterson, whose family had been in Blackwood Hollow for generations, cleared his throat. "So, you're saying it wasn't a curse, but it was from the earth?" "Yes, Mr. Peterson," Alara confirmed. "A dangerous, natural emanation, potentially deadly, especially in a contained environment like a house, and under specific weather conditions that would concentrate it." After a long, heated debate, a decision was reached. The council, swayed by Mrs. Gable's quiet authority and Alara's irrefutable evidence, agreed to take action. They would hire environmental specialists to conduct a comprehensive survey of the marsh, specifically the area Alara had identified, to confirm the presence and nature of the toxic emanations. They would put up warning signs, and most importantly, they would publicly acknowledge the tragedy of the Maddock children. The Maddock house, they decided, would finally be demolished. Not burned in a superstitious frenzy, but systematically dismantled, respectfully, with an understanding of the horrors it had contained. They would finally let go of the physical structure that had held a century of unspoken fear and grief. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Maddock children, once a whispered secret, slowly began to emerge from the shadows of Blackwood Hollow. Alara, with Mrs. Gable's help, meticulously transcribed Eleanor's diary, making copies for the Historical Society archives, ensuring that Eleanor's voice, her tragic account, would never be lost again. She wrote a detailed report for the town, combining her scientific findings with the historical narrative, providing a comprehensive account of the events of October 27, 1899. The environmental survey confirmed Alara's hypothesis. The marsh indeed contained significant deposits of heavy metals and unique organic compounds that, under specific anaerobic conditions, produced a cocktail of toxic gases and vapors, including phosphine and traces of methylated mercury. The green fire and cold shimmer were indeed rare, naturally occurring phenomena linked to these emissions, phenomena that were terrifying and inexplicable to the people of the late 19th century. The Maddock house, built on a slight rise but directly downwind of the most active vent in the marsh, had acted as a perfect trap for these deadly emanations, especially during colder, stiller periods when the gases settled. On a crisp, clear morning in late November, a small gathering took place at the Blackwood Hollow Cemetery. The town council, Mrs. Gable, and several curious townsfolk stood around the 6 small, dark gravestones of the Maddock children. Elara stood quietly among them, a sense of profound closure settling over her. Mr. Peterson, the council chairman, cleared his throat, his voice rough with unaccustomed emotion. He spoke not just of the historical facts, but of the town's long-held secret and the injustice of it. He read excerpts from Eleanor's diary, her words, so full of a child's fear and resilience, finally echoing through the quiet cemetery, giving voice to the forgotten. A small, simple plaque was placed near the Maddock graves, commissioned by the town, acknowledging the tragedy and the unique environmental circumstances that led to their deaths. It was a small gesture, a century too late, but it was a beginning. The Maddock children were no longer a mystery, no longer a shameful secret. They were victims of a rare and terrible natural phenomenon, and their story was finally acknowledged, grieved, and understood. Elara Vance stayed in Blackwood Hollow for a few more months, working with the environmental specialists, advising on mitigation efforts in the marsh, and helping the Historical Society properly catalog the Maddock family's rediscovered history. She published her findings, not just in an academic journal, but also in a local Blackwood Hollow publication, ensuring the community had full access to the truth. Her academic career would undoubtedly flourish after this discovery, but for Elara, the real reward was not the recognition, but the sense of having done right by Eleanor and her siblings. She had given them their voices back, finally breaking the long, oppressive silence that had surrounded their tragic end. As she packed her belongings to leave Blackwood Hollow, the Maddock house was gone, replaced by a cleared patch of land, soon to be repurposed into a small, respectful memorial garden. The lingering scent of damp earth and decaying leaves still clung to the air, but the pervasive, sickly sweet metallic tang was gone, dispersed by the changing seasons and the efforts to understand and contain the breath of the fen. Elara knew the marsh would always hold its secrets, its ancient, powerful energies. But now, at least one of its most tragic stories had finally been told, echoing through the quiet hollow, a solemn testament to 6 lost children and the woman who finally brought them peace. Her hands, once trembling with fear and apprehension, now held the weight of a truth uncovered, a legacy redeemed. The silence of the graves had been broken, replaced by the whispering wind carrying the true story of the Maddock children.